today's guest is none other than Pirkx founder and CEO, who is also partnering with me on the Disrupting Wellbeing podcast. So, I mean, you're an all-around disruptor, so it was a no-brainer to get this conversation started with you, Stella Smith. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Petra. It's very exciting to be here, and I'm excited for what the podcast has to come.
Absolutely. Now, I know in both of our respective fields, we're really trying to change the conversation from that kind of bubble bath well-being where it's all about self-care and sitting back, and kind of throw in how ambition can go along with well-being, performance goes along with well-being, and really just enjoying the journey and living good lives and doing good work. So to kick off this conversation, I'd love to ask you, what drives you to want to change your part of the world? And you've got big ambitions, so tell us a little bit about them.
That's very true. I do have big ambitions. And I think a lot of our conversations that we've had ahead of this podcast have been, how does well-being fit into that? But a direct answer to your question is what do I think drives me? I think that I like solving. So I think probably my key thing that drives me is not something I always want to take on board, but I like to solve. So if you put a little problem in front of me or you stack some things up, then I like to reorder them or find a new way to build them. And I think probably, we've actually had this conversation privately, nurture versus nature and everything else. But I think there's a nature in me to want to solve. And I think that's probably, how else do you justify that you want to work over the top hours and do everything else? So I think that the power to solve.
You're so passion driven, like everything you talk about and build is, I guess, from that core place to solve. Let us know what's the problem you're solving at the moment.
Yeah, of course. Well, at the moment, I've landed into this one, but it seems to be doing well. So ultimately, Pirkx solves the fact that well-being isn't accessible to everybody. And really, I had a problem myself. I had a number of small businesses, and I was given a lot of good stuff. I think my career was a decent career, and I was given lots of benefits and things to look after me as a worker. And I had a number of small businesses with a lot of self-employed workers or contract workers. And I tried to get all the good stuff that I was given when I worked as an investment banker and get it for them, and I couldn't. So I built it, and that's what Pirkx is. Basically, it's a platform that enables an individual or workers in a smaller business, so SME business owners, to be able to give benefits to their workers. And that I can make it sound far more exciting than it is, but fundamentally it's £4.50. You get 24/7 doctors, counsellors, virtual physio, discounted gyms, a whole load of other stuff, the kind of things you get in a big organisation, but you can have it if you're anybody. So it's all about trying to democratise access to the things that I think are important in terms of taking care of people.
I mean, you've had 9 lives, it seems, just as the part, the sort of careers that you've had, in financial services, in entrepreneurship, right? Lots of kind of high risk environments in a way for burnout and kind of falling apart. And so I love that you've kind of translated some of that experience into like, well, how do we make this actually work? And I guess that's why we wanted to kick off the podcast, was like, how do we make well-being really normalized and something that's just easy as part of business, as part of our lifestyle in a post-pandemic world when everyone's sort of still experiencing, I guess, survival mode and kind of figuring out how to fit this into their lives. So I love what you're doing. So I always like to start a conversation by going into some of the roots of, you say nature versus nurture, like what is the things that make us, what drives us? And I think we both have a bit of a story, but specifically our family dynamics, I think, and our culture growing up, whatever that looks like, education, whatever that was like, I think that affects how we are in cultures, right? It's like, what were the roles that we played? So I'm curious, what are the bits that you can tell us and myself and the listeners about the role you played as a kid?
Yeah, I think, there's an amazing woman called Vivian Ming, and she talked about, the things that we get, and she talked about resilience. And I think some of my childhood gave me resilience. So I think that's what my childhood gave me. So, my parents were divorced. Unfortunately, my mum had cancer, and I grew up with my father, and he didn't know the ways to look after children in terms of feeding them and things. But I had the most amazing parents, and I spent a lot of time on my own. I spent a lot of time looking after my younger brother. So from the age of kind of 11 onwards, I looked after my 8-year-old brother, and I learned to cook and to clean and to have to earn money at a very early age. Left home at 16, but was probably self-sufficient even ahead of then. So I think that childhood, my whole life feels like a fairy tale, Petra. I still have that moment where I stand there day to day now, and I'm like, how did I end up here? From a different beginning, and it's amazing. And if you reflect on it, even just for 2 or 3 seconds, it makes me happy. And I feel happy about that. But what if you had to pick out one thing that your childhood gave you that made you now? What would you pick?
Ooh, one thing. I mean, I think like you, I love that kind of phrasing of like, my childhood made me resilient. It's a real like, ooh, we can kind of figure out a few things there, right? About the bumpy ride that often gives us resilience, but also it's like gives us a superpower in running our own
Agree.
businesses and being able to handle risk, right? But of course, there's a shadow side of growing up before our time in a way and needing to be the grown up in a way early on, those sorts of things. Now, people who follow me know a bit about my story, right? I was born in an extreme religious cult, which on the one hand, people don't realize that there were some good bits. Like there was a real strong sense of mission. There was a sense of community. There was this idea that people had your back. Of course, it was later on that I realized that it was as long as you agreed with the party line, then people had your back, right? And
Yeah.
this is what I see in workplaces, and why this topic matters to me is because I'm seeing similarities between the toxicity I realized that existed in cult life and the toxicity I'm seeing in many corporates, even the ones who have benefits, but they're a bit shrouded in secrecy. There's loads of stigma. Perhaps people aren't accessing them themselves when they actually need them from a prevention standpoint rather than later on. But what was the one thing? I was a shy kid. I
Oh
was a
yeah.
kid who, yeah, I know,
Okay.
funny that, right? So
Yeah.
I'm one of 5 siblings, step family, blended family. My dad's African American. I'm blonde. My siblings are brunettes. Like we're just all the colors of the rainbows. And I was an observer, and interesting at the time. I was shy. I stayed beneath the radar because to go above it was to risk being punished or called out or shamed, and I wasn't sort of able to do that. I wasn't brave. But what I did learn, the superpower it gave me was observing human behavior, right?
Yeah.
And so being able, long before I had language around this, being able to kind of notice like, oh, this bit, is dangerous. This bit is healthy. This person is, risky. This person is safe. These sorts of things, which now quite early on, C-suite level, exec level,
Yeah.
right through to any levels, I'm like, yeah, I got this. I can see it because now I've got language around it. So lots in both of our stories, I think, that
Yeah.
influences us today. And of course, for me, I spiraled at one point once I left into depression, anxiety, addiction, and had to kind of teach myself first in order to then qualify as a therapist, develop my own business, and kind of message off the back of it. But it's deeply personal
Yeah,
for
I mean,
for
I
me
think
and what I've seen.
whose journey is not deeply personal, and I think all the things, I mean, it's not just our family lives; it's our early careers, and I think mine was about being resourceful and making money. I've always been good at making money, no matter whether it's a paper round or for example, I sold plugs at school. The bath plugs.
Really?
I was the cool kid
There was
in
a market
school.
for
I mean,
this?
yeah. Well, I made a market.
I
The
see.
like a bath plug.
Yeah.
I took them off and I spray painted them and I put a piece of string through them. And because I was the coolest kid in school, I wore a plug. Everyone wanted a plug, so I was buying them at 20p and selling them
At a
at
profit.
a profit, but that paid for food and things that I needed. So I think I've learned to be resourceful as well in terms of having to make something out of nothing. And I guess that gives you the power to build, or the power to sit there in a room with nothing in it and then make something happen. And that's quite a that's an interesting place to sit, isn't it? Well, I'm never bored. That's helpful.
Well, no, and it's making me think of some of the bits that I wrote in my book. Was like there seems to be this separation sometimes between ambition and success on the one hand, and well-being and self-care over here, sort of outside of the workplace or in your downtime or when you're falling apart. That's when we then think of those elements. And I guess for me, it's like, can they coexist? We're both ambitious, passionate business owners, and we know there's sleepless nights that come with that, or you're burning the midnight oil, or whatever. And yet, we also can invest in our well-being, our relationships. I don't know. What's your thoughts on just those things coexisting?
I think this is probably one of the reasons I'm even sitting here on the podcast, because I think the way you talk about well-being, I had, you're one of the characters that has challenged my thinking on that. I feel well when I've done my 20 emails of an evening. That makes me feel great. And I do like a hot bubble bath as well. So I'm not denying that. But sometimes, I don't know, with my head and the way I operate as an individual, the taking action is the thing that soothes, or is the thing that makes me feel great. So in the same way that some people go to the gym, my ex-wife, for example, she runs, and she is not normal in terms of how she behaves. She's not in line with how she normally behaves if she doesn't go 4 times a week. She loves running, right? And I assume that's to do with the chemical reaction that you have when you run, and it releases certain chemicals. I think I get the same from doing things in my work. And so, I think it can coexist. And my one example of that, and look, maybe this is contentious, I suppose, but I went to have my stress hormones checked, and I always said to everybody, I don't feel stressed, and everyone else says, no, you're burnout. I'm like, yeah, but I've been doing it for 25, or too many years now. I've got lots of wrinkles, a lot of years. And I went and had my and I hadn't slept for 3 days beforehand. I'd had only 8 hours sleep, and they checked my stress hormone. I think the top of the range is like 4, 5, 6, and I was 102. So genuinely, I think that I've managed to shape my working life so that I enjoy it, and it feels, even though I know it wouldn't to the outside world, it would feel like, and there are huge amounts of pressure and things like that, but I wouldn't want it any other way. And so as long as I can take care of myself physically and mentally within that, and I do little things, so I think they can. I think for me, ambition is something that, well, first of all, I'm not sure that I have it. I mean, that's a self-deprecating thing, but I think
you do. I know you. You definitely have ambition, and you have a drive to create change in the world, but also, like you said, to make money, to leave a legacy. Like, I see all of those components in you.
Yeah, and I think so. So I think it's a space where I believe if it doesn't exist, I wish it would, because I think that having well-being in a manner that suits the individual, and being able to be successful, have ambition, and do all of those things, and have well-being work alongside that, complement that, be part of that, be inherently part of that, is really important. And I'd wish that for everybody if I could.
And you said something so important, which I see all the time in businesses. It's not this formula about the amount of hours that you work, because everybody is different. So there's almost this shaming of like, oh, you worked overtime. Oh my goodness, you took your laptop on holiday, right? And this is, I guess, what we want to focus on in the Disrupting Wellbeing podcast, is to just real talk and not be as politically correct, and just think everybody is different and needs different things. But that element of success actually can coexist, right? There are small things that we can do. And for me, disrupting well-being is also about the influences that I see affecting people. It's about, are your goals aligned with what you do? So me and you both have fun when we're working, right? So we're experiencing joy. We're not going, oh, I have to experience joy afterwards to top up for this like horribleness that some people experience. We're actually like, oh my God, I'm so lucky that I get to have a conversation as part of work, or I get to meet really interesting people, right?
Yeah.
Or do really interesting projects. Every day is different, all those pieces. And so it's less about the hours and more about alignment, I think, with your flow, your skills, your kind of joy. And then the thing about influences, I was doing a keynote not long ago, Q&A at the end, and this woman stands up. She must be in her 20s, right? And she says, Petra, I've got this question. She goes, I'm doing everything they tell me to do. Who's they? But whatever. I'm having a cold shower in the morning. I'm waking up at 5. I'm journaling. I'm meditating. I'm working out. Like, she listed maybe 12 things that she was doing before the working day started at 9.
Wow.
Right? And then she said, but I'm more anxious than I've ever been. And I was a bit like, well, no wonder, right? But she was technically, according to Instagram and TikTok, doing everything right? There's all this science, there's all these influencers saying, cold shower, the 3 things that you do first thing in the morning. And she was doing them, and it was stressing her out as if she wasn't getting well-being done right. I don't know. What are your thoughts on just the influences that people are experiencing affecting their well-being?
Well, I think, look, you're talking to someone who sits in a room often and doesn't leave. So,
you're not taking cold showers at 4 a.m.?
No, I like hot baths with candles and chocolate. And, I think well-being, my solve for Pirkx, the hardest thing to solve for Pirkx was, how on earth do I build one platform that improves well-being for everybody, yet we're all so different? So, whether that be age, whether that be where we live, whether that be how much money we own, culture, how on earth do you get one platform that slices through everything? And so I'm answering this in a long-winded way, and not as a sales piece for Pirkx, but more in the sense that when I look to, just like the lady you spoke about, when I look to try and find the reference points for, I don't believe anyone's good at strategy. I believe if we map data and fact, then strategy becomes clear. So I wanted a data point, a reference point to say, right, I can tick well-being for everybody. And there were so many. There were happiness indexes. I could have looked at household debt for financial well-being. There were all these different things. And my grandmother used to give me the dictionary to read when I was a kid. And the dictionary,
that makes a lot of sense.
Well, she also gave me the Maastricht Treaty to read when I was, in my late teens. Which, I know. Hey, I'm really good at reading through a legal document these days. Yes. Like we said, nurture. But the dictionary definition of well-being is the state of being happy, healthy, or comfortable. And what we can work out for everybody is the determinants of human happiness, the determinants of humans being more healthy, and the determinants of humans being more comfortable. And at Pirkx, we break it down into 5 areas. And actually, that rings true for me personally. So it's your health, your physical and mental health, your wealth, your financial well-being. There's a lot of financial stress, social interaction and family. I mean, you spoke about your teenagers just waking up this morning. Our families mean a lot to us. My daughter. And then learning, or engaging, or ambition, and all of those things. And I think that with all the influences that are out there, for me, it's about selecting the things that work for me. Genuinely, chocolate works for me. I watched Willy Wonka as a child, and I peel back the thing as if it's the Wonka bar, and then it goes in your mouth and it feels good, right? And I love hot bars. I like walking. I try and make sure I take time for a walk, but I also like winning. I also like doing my job. I also like, I'm never going to be at the end of the to-do list, but if I accomplish 20% of it, I feel like I'm having a great day. And that makes me feel just as good as peeling back that chocolate and taking a bite. And so I think there is a lot of influence. I think there's a lot of undue pressure on people to follow suit. And I think trying to find the individuality in that is key.
Yeah, so it's learning to listen to your own body, because your well-being practices can evolve over time.
Okay.
And I love that you're offering so many varied offers, right, as part of your solution, because it is then about the individual going, I need to talk about this
Yeah.
with a professional, or there are some self-help kind of elements that I can do, right? But it almost gives people need the permission to go, oh, you don't have to do everything, right? And we're even talking about the good influences, right? Not to mention technology and the negative influences around comparing and the elements that are affecting our young people's mental health.
Yes.
So a lot there. Now, you talked about the definition of well-being, and it really does mirror the definition of mental health. So if we think about like the mental health crisis a little bit, the World Health Organization defines mental health as a state of well-being. So to use your definitions, where we can cope with the normal stresses of life, where we can give back to our community, and where we can be productive and fruitful. I'm kind of mashing it up, but those are the kind of principal elements within it. And so when we talk about, and I come from the mental health lens, right? People forget that there's this crossover. And so that mental health is about all of us. And it's about being productive. To your point, when I get those 20 emails done, when I feel like I'm winning and achieving, like that boosts your mental health, right? And of course, success can mean different things to different people. Let's just go into the mental health element a little bit. Like, what are you seeing when it comes to that? I guess crisis is the word that lots of people are kind of throwing about, and I can dive in as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, I think that there is clear that the access, so your views on mental health are far more, well, you have an understanding by virtue of what you've learned and your experience and your career.
Absolutely.
I've fallen into it. And so my understanding of mental health is far less. What I do know is the bit that I see, which is that I don't believe there's a level playing field for access to support. And that's what my role is in doing what I do day to day. And I think with the crisis, the bits that I see where I'm interviewed on television or the like, where I'm always questioned is around waiting times, access to things, that even if you have identified that there's a need for help, the inability to get access to them. But what are your views? Your views are far more interesting on this, given how close you are to the subject.
Well, I think you're right. I think we're seeing similar things. That there's the crisis piece is not having access to support, but also a lack of real education or an ability to assess where we're at. And still, we have shame and stigma, right? So I'm not going to say, "Ooh, I'm having some dark thoughts" to a friend, perhaps, because you're like, "Ooh, they might judge me," or I don't want to admit to myself that perhaps this is a problem. So, and this is where we're seeing the burnout so much at the moment, is like we're in survival mode. Many people have been through a lot during a stretched out period of the pandemic times. And that stress has been stacking in their body, and they haven't perhaps released it in ways that are healthy, which could be movement, bubble baths, but also talking, whatever. So when we ignore it, this is the thing that makes it worse for everyone. When we ignore it and we wear stronger and stronger masks and armor to pretend like we're good, it stacks up, and then the cracks begin to show, whether it's through drinking too much, whether our relationships start to suffer, whether our work starts to suffer, whatever it might be, or our physical health starts to suffer. People forget that mental health, like our brain, is attached to our body, right? And so looking after our physical health can improve mental health. And I do think in a world of screens, right? Everything is staring, and it's also sitting, right? And you have to be a lot more conscious about, okay, I'm going to go for that walk, or
you've made me want to sit up
meetings.
more comfortably in my chair now.
Like with my team, I'm like, do we have to be at a screen? Is anyone sharing anything? If not, let's get on headphones. We're in different countries, right? Let's get on headphones and meet and walk and talk and meet, and we can do notes on our phone or whatever it might be. So like, it feels like we have to consciously be more creative. But I guess the essence is, if you ignore things and you don't do the prevention stuff, which you guys are supporting people to focus on, it ends up stacking to a point of crisis. Now you don't get support, and then it continues to get worse.
Do you know what my one learning was? In COVID, I was really poorly. I lost my grandmother to COVID, and it was before her time, and I didn't get to say goodbye. All the typical COVID story.
Awful.
Yeah, well, a lot of people, I think, went through that. I mean, we forget that just a few years ago, we were locked in our houses, right? And now we're thriving and doing all the things that we're doing, but we were all locked inside, not knowing if the world would end, right? I mean, that's it. And I was actually just walking down the road in Covent Garden the other day. I thought, this is so odd, but that was not that long ago, but yet
Not long ago.
it's as if it never happened. But of course, there's a cost in that. Anyway, I digress. My point with my losing my grandmother, I then got COVID really badly, and I ended up with pneumonia 3 times over, so I couldn't breathe. So I was really paranoid about COVID. So I wore my mask long after everybody else took the mask off. I was I was a diehard mask wearer.
You were affected so personally.
I was.
Yeah.
And look, it's a small thing. It didn't change my life. I was still functioning as an adult, doing my work and doing all the things I do. But I sat there one day, and I've used the Pirkx doctor like 13 times with my daughter, Darling. And so there's a general health conscious thing in there somewhere. That's probably that nurture nature conversation. But anyway, I decided whilst I was sitting there to call the Pirkx counsellor. Now, I would never have called a counsellor, right? And I appreciate that's right or wrong and everything else. It's honest.
It's what it is.
And I own a business that delivers mental health, but I had never used a counsellor before because my situation wasn't so dire that I felt it was negatively impacting my life in a way that I needed to reach out for help. Now, I called that number. It's, and they gave me 3 little exercises, and they were small. They basically said, Stella, you're solving for worst case scenario, but you're not thinking about best case scenario, and you're definitely not thinking about most likely case scenario. And then they gave me a little exercise to look out the window and do something. Do you know what? The mask came off within a week. Now, I'm sure counselling isn't like that in general. But what I thought was nice about that is my situation wasn't dire. It wasn't horrendous. I was functioning perfect norm, but a little bit of help in a positive way to a scenario that wasn't actually an issue. There was no big issue.
But it was an
issue. I just looked like a bit of a different person wearing a mask when nobody else did. But that was okay with me because I'm quite happy wearing that. But what I guess my point on it is that in a backdrop of a mental health crisis, I probably didn't feel that it was valid for me to reach out because my problem wasn't that bad. And I think that alongside there being a crisis, if there is a crisis and there are giant waiting lists and it is expensive to find help in a lot of ways, then if there is a way that you can actually bring that into the resilience building, tackling a problem before it gets to crisis point, that would be amazing, I think.
Yeah. Well, this is so relatable because whether it's wearing a mask or whatever it might be, like everyone is going through stuff, right? Whatever that might be, real life stuff. And so no one is immune from our mental health taking a hit, right? No. And noticing early on, but I think what you said, like so many people can relate to, like, oh, other people have it worse than me, or I'm not that bad. I should, famous words, right? Yeah. I should be able to buck up, deal with it, stiff upper lip, whatever it might be that kind of influences people. And your experience, like people think, oh, if I go to counseling, I'm gonna have to stay there for a year, or I'm gonna have to go deep into all this stuff. Sometimes it's just practical mindset stuff that maybe you didn't know because you haven't immersed yourself in the learning around it, right? And then immediately it was useful.
Yeah, and I mean, look, that goes to a question I've got for you, which is, look, we're doing this podcast. It's very Petra and a little bit Pirkx, and there's a reason that we're doing this. And I know we've talked many times, but we probably haven't articulated it. Why are you doing the podcast? I know why I want a dose of Petra to have conversations like that. But why are we doing this, and what do we think we're going to achieve? Because clearly we're going to pay a bit of money to put a podcast out there. What do we think we can bring? And I guess it would be nice to hear from you what you think.
Yeah. So I love podcasting mostly because I love the ability to have deep conversations with people. And I know we've got some amazing guests lined up, thought leaders, people from all different walks of life, right? And I'm just really excited to go a little bit deeper than when I go to Wellbeing conferences. I hear about, all the things they're doing well, right? So it's like, hey, we piloted this thing, and here were all the amazing things that we achieved, right? And everyone's in the PR version of Wellbeing, right? Which is like, we've got this right. And they're talking about like a microcosm of their business or about something they tried. They're not talking about, well, what were the struggles with it? What's not going well? Like where are we getting it wrong, and how are we learning? And I think whenever I speak to audiences in those events, that's the bit they want to know. They want to know that they're not alone in like the struggle, and like, we're in a new world, right? Where we're in this hybrid world, and it cracks me up when businesses are like, we've got this perfect hybrid policy. Come in for 2 days or come in for 3, or whatever the policy is, to create some kind of illusion of safety for their people, to make them be the most productive they can be. And I think it's an illusion, because we are all making this up as we go along. And so I want us leaders and managers and thought leaders to kind of disrupt that a little bit and think, actually, let's embrace the experiment, right? Let's embrace it openly and talk about where are the struggles and the difficulties. Because I actually think the whole world of work and how we're thinking about well-being needs to evolve a lot quicker than it is to match the way the world is evolving. If we think of AI, if we think of the way the world of work is moving in such a fast direction, and we're still putting on, little talks to tell people stories and, just doing things that I don't think are disruptive enough. So I want to bring some of that, bring some edge with you, and also with our amazing guests, kind of go beneath the surface of like the shiny PR well-being, right? And go a little bit deeper.
And do you think that there's a common denominator that we don't always do as we're told? Because you will have a challenging conversation about mental health. You also, in your company, it doesn't feel, I feel more comfortable to be able to have a conversation without worrying that I'm going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. It's okay to ask a challenging question, even if it's not framed in perfectly the right way. So in that way, part of my reason for picking to do the podcast with you is that I think you come across as brave enough to have those more challenging conversations. And well, I know some of the guests that we've got coming up, so I know there'll be some interesting ones. But would you say the same? Why did you pick Pirkx to work with?
So you guys are disruptive. You as a personality, and then your team and what you're trying to build is ambitious, it's broad, and you guys are learning all the time, which I love as well. Like you're always adding new things. I know you're in different countries. You got a whole international reach and big plans. And also you are like me, you're not tied to a business where you have to toe the party line, right? Yes. You are the business. And so that gives us both this element of freedom to objectively kind of assess things from the outside a little bit and what we're seeing across the board. And we have that freedom as owners of our business to say the things, right? And to challenge other people to say the things. And that's where I want to go a little bit deeper, that disrupting well-being is about brave conversations. It's saying the things people are afraid of saying. It's challenging this notion of PR well-being. And it's actually getting personal into individual stories as well. Like I'm always keen to kind of go like, why does this matter to you? Like, where has your mental health been affected? And of course, for you as a founder and somebody with massive ambition and investment, we hear a lot about founder mental health and how there can be a real kind of pressure that especially these young kids coming into entrepreneurship are really deeply affected by. Can you speak a little bit to your own mental health as a founder or what you've seen as a business owner?
Yeah, sure. Look, I mean, it's tough and it's not pretty. I average 47 meetings a week. I'm a single parent with a kid, so I need to look after my child. In amongst that, my phone doesn't stop ringing till 10, 11 at night, even when I'm trying to do baby bath and bedtime. Well, everyone tells me she's not a baby, but she's my baby. Of course, she'll always be a baby. Exactly. But yeah, I think that there are moments where it feels difficult. And I'm a great fan of mindset, but there are times where you're so exhausted, where you've done 14, 19-hour days, but it's not. Do you know what I think the issue is with being a founder is it is non-stop. So I've done that for 4 years, as you know, because we've had lots of conversations. I haven't taken many holidays, in fact, 2. And that takes its impact. That takes its toll. Sometimes I think I was born with confidence, so I don't feel insecurity in that I'm not doing the right thing at the right time. Maybe that's a mission driven founder. Maybe the mission, in answer to your question, I think that there's a piece where, as we talked about, ambition and success, but then there's this mission that kind of picks you up and drags you to continue doing what you're doing. But there are times where, you know, there are times where you
It
sit there
takes
and you're
its
just
toll.
like, please, can you just stop for just
Make the
two
noise
minutes? Yeah,
stop.
yeah, I want a
Yeah.
cup of tea. And you can't do that. Or very often you feel like you can't do that. And I think that the fundamental reason for that on mental health for me as a founder is responsibility. I take a lot of responsibility. I have the responsibility of people's jobs. I have the responsibility to deliver the mission. I have the responsibility of being a parent, of being a daughter, of being a brother, a sister to my brother and my sister. And you don't have many places to ask for help because it's quite a lonely place. Nobody, you don't go and down dump on somebody else if you're a CEO. Everybody comes to you. Like, somebody can't handle their to-do list.
Yeah.
Somebody else wants something else done. And I think that responsibility has an impact because you absorb it. And I think that, and I'm not the best one at it, but I think making sure that you're aware of that responsibility, you wear it hurts. It's also the most pleasurable thing, other than my kid on the
You've
planet.
chosen it as
I've
well, right?
chosen
Yeah.
it, but yeah, I think that has an impact. There are times where I once every 6 months, I've told you once before, I lie in the bath and I cry like a baby and I don't want to get out, and I think, why on earth am I doing this, and I'd rather just do nothing and what have you. But then it all takes over, doesn't
The
it? That
spark
want to
comes back.
solve. Yeah. And it's mindset, little things, picking up and getting and doing the dishwasher. For me, an activity changes mindset instantly. And I think that comes from childhood, and needing to do that to feed yourself, clothe yourself, and do all of those things to survive.
And everyone's different. And I once heard somebody describe like well-being as not just what am I doing today, right? Because that
Yes.
might be your 19-hour day, but how do
Yeah.
you zoom out on your quarter or your life, right? And go, what are the pockets of time where I do get that recovery, whatever that looks like for me? It could just be changing headspace, right? Rather than like resting. It could be traveling, exploring, like just nurturing our creativity. Because when we do that, we bring that back into our businesses as well. That
Right.
resourced, clear thinking kind of person. I think everyone can relate. We're kind of coming up to time. I feel like we could be
Okay.
talking all
For
day
hours.
on this topic. Absolutely. But two final questions: like, what are you excited about the podcast moving forward? And then I'd love to know if you see well-being kind of changing the world of work in the future. Like, what are your forward projections about some of that?
Sure. So, look, in terms of the podcast, I'm very excited because I know that we've got some really cool guests coming in. I also love hearing you speak. And as you know, I don't listen to many podcasts, but I'm going to listen to yours. So that's a good start. And I think that the podcast is important to me. I wanted to do something to bring the conversation, but I also wanted it to be in Pirkx style. And Petra, you've probably, the fact that you can have those braver conversations, the fact that you, in my opinion, you tell it like it is, and also that you're happy to challenge the person opposite you on asking questions that mean that you can't just answer with some kind of broad brush
I'll see
PR
right through it.
thingy. Exactly. And that
Right
you're
through
just,
it.
and
Yeah.
that's the whole psychology thing. And you're in trouble as a guest probably from having that. We won't play this to anyone before
No,
they join.
no.
And then in terms of the future of work, look, I think, well, what I wish for and what I think are probably two different things. And my job is to try and build the thing that I wish for. I think all of the things that we see every day, which is, there are lots of stats of, I think 35% increase, or there was a survey where 35% of the respondents said that they have permanent workers asking to move to more temporary contracts or contractual arrangements rather than full-term employees. So I think we're going to see the way in which workers are engaged by organizations change. I think that we are going to see far more global as a footprint. We get more and more customers now that have just 200 people, but actually they're in 27 countries. I don't remember that happening 10, 20 years ago, or it was more of an anomaly, whereas I'm seeing that every day in the job that I do now, that people can work from different places, from different hours and different things. And I think that changes the work-life balance, and then that therefore changes work. And what I wish for, I love my job. Like I actually, whilst we've been on this podcast, we were talking about my parents. My dad walked in, which and walked straight back out this room, and because I went, and I love the fact that my work is part of my life, and I enjoy my life, and I enjoy my work. And if there was a wish for me professionally in that, it would be that I have the ability to democratize access to basic workplace wellness. That sounds not important, but for me, it is.
Hugely.
If I can get for £4.50 doctors and counsellors to people across the globe, then that's my job, and that's what I'm going to try and do. So that's my wish, is that I succeed in that mission, and my team succeed in that mission. And I think that COVID has accelerated where our workplace will look in the next 5 and 10 years. I think it would have taken us a lot longer to get there.
I love it. I am down. I'm with you. You are one of those amazing people that is being the change. It sounds like a cheesy statement, but you're showing up and you're doing it. You're taking the risks. You're having the conversations. You are disrupting well-being. Thank you so much, Stella, for being the first ever guest on the Disrupting Wellbeing podcast. I'm so excited for the conversations coming up and what we can create. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Petra.